Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Mike Sykuta. I'm Executive Director of the Financial Research Institute at the University of Missouri. Welcome to this afternoon's Hot Topic Hotline webinar, Harmonizing Electricity and Natural Gas Systems. FRI has been around for about 30 years. Our mission is to try and facilitate more effective and better informed regulatory decision-making in the public utility space by bringing together stakeholders in a neutral environment where we can debate, discuss, and learn about the different issues affecting our industries and the regulatory process. Today's topic is particularly timely. Now, harmonizing natural gas and the electricity systems is a pressing issue, especially as we're headed into another winter season. The results of a few winter experiences with Winter Storm Uri and Winter Storm Elliot have highlighted the importance of how electricity and natural gas systems work together or sometimes don't. We know that this is especially important from our state regulatory perspective, with NARUC recently announcing the formation of a new working group, GEAR, to focus on these issues. So we're happy to have with us today a panel of experts to share their expertise and their backgrounds and perspectives on this issue. Our program today will be moderated by Joseph Accardo, who is with PSEG. PSEG is a diversified energy company with assets in electricity and natural gas, so they have a particular interest even in-house how this works. So we're very thankful to have Joe. Joe will introduce our speakers, and toward the last 10 minutes or so of our webinar, we'll open up to question and answers from the conversation, or from participants to be part of the conversation. So with that, Joe, I will turn it over to you and let the conversation begin.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to you and FRI for helping put together this particular session here on a pretty timely topic, to the point you made earlier, and one that at PSEG is important. As you noted, we are an electric and gas utility, the largest of each in New Jersey, and so the topic of today's conversation is one that we are mindful of and are examining on a regular basis, and never necessarily solving, but trying to get as close to possible, trying to find the right outcome for our customers, and that's what this is all about. So I appreciate the opportunity to moderate this today and have the opportunity to introduce the panelists. First is Pat O'Connell, who is the chair of the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, and Pat's a civil engineer, and he's worked on supply planning for both a natural gas and electric utility, and he led the clean energy program at Western Resource Advocates. He sits on SPP's regional state committees, WEC's member advisory council, and NARUC's Energy Resources and Environment Committee. I'll also introduce, so welcome, Pat, and then next introduce Kristen Munch as a Senior Associate General Counsel at ComEd. Kristen joined ComEd as a Senior Associate General Counsel in the spring of 2022, and over her career has served in a variety of roles in the energy industry. Before arriving at ComEd, she served almost 3 years as Director of Regulatory and Consumer Strategy at Nat Grid, where she worked on issues related to gas and electric harmonization before joining ComEd. So welcome to the panel, Kristen. Next is Daryl Lawrence at the Pennsylvania Office of Consumer Advocate. Daryl worked at the Pennsylvania Office of Consumer Advocate. He's worked there since 2005. And his current state practice for the OCA focuses on energy matters. He leads the OCA's efforts in participating in major energy cases that come before FERC and may have an impact on Pennsylvania ratepayers, including interstate natural gas pipeline and electric transmission rate cases, and various rulemakings as to matters of national importance on energy issues. So welcome, Daryl. And also on the panel is Matthew Agin, who's the Chief Regulatory Counsel for the AGA, American Gas Association. Matthew is an energy attorney with over 18 years of experience in the private sector and with federal government. He has extensive experience advising and representing natural gas distribution companies, oil pipelines, natural gas pipelines, and electric utilities in a variety of federal regulatory and transactional matters arising under the Natural Gas Act, Interstate Commerce Act, and Federal Power Act before the FERC. So welcome, Matthew, as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so lots to talk about on this very interesting topic here. So while the issue of harmonizing gas and electric for utility customers has been on the radar for a long time, I think in the last couple of years, we've had weather events, I'll say, that really have brought this topic to people's mind, and the thoughts about how to address, what is the perfect state of harmony, if you could ever achieve that. So the first was in 2021 with Winter Storm Uri, and then next was in 2022, almost a year ago now, Winter Storm Elliot, which created major power outages in the winter months, and really brought more awareness and urgency to this conversation. Notice I'm not saying anything about 2023 yet, because 2023 is not yet over, and I want to just make believe that we're going to be fine in 2023. So we've got about 18 days to go. So we'll see how things go. But just last month, FERC and NARUC released the final report on Winter Storm Elliot, which recommends the completion of cold weather reliability standard revisions that were identified after Winter Storm Uri, and also improvements to reliability for the United States natural gas infrastructure. So I'll throw this out to the panel, and any of you feel free to jump in and provide some perspective. What are the major insights and takeaways that you have that come from these experiences and these events, and then also then FERC and NERC's report following Winter Storm Elliot?
Sure. I guess I'll start. Matt Hagan at AGA here. I think there's a lot to be unpacked both from Uri and Elliot, and to put Elliot in perspective, it did encompass the largest U.S. demand day for natural gas ever, and that was about 160 BCF. And so you got to put that into context that it was a huge demand day, and at the same time, it didn't really approach the peak day or peak weather days that most LDCs plan for. It wasn't as cold as people would normally have expected. So you got that kind of juxtaposition. So you got to look at what happened. And I would say we really appreciate FERC and their effort in highlighting the issues that might have happened in New York City with regard to the Consolidated Edison and their service territory. And I will say AGA's research indicates that actually it wasn't just a New York City issue. It actually was an issue up and down the eastern seaboard. So when you read the Elliot report from FERC, it wasn't just limited to just Consolidated Edison. A couple of the main takeaways to look at is really what happened and understanding what happened during the production declines, how that impacted what happened, why, for example, Consolidated Edison lost pressure on a large number of pipelines heading into its system. The other thing to look at, one of the positive things is to look at, is how the role storage played in kind of keeping the system going. About 40% of the gas delivered on that day came from storage. So that if it's in storage, that means you plan for it, you plan for the worst case scenario, you got the commodity into storage, and you've got the capacity to move it from storage to your city gate from an LDC perspective. So I think those are storage is one positive thing to look at. And looking at gas harmonization as a whole, looking at how better to look at placing storage, if possible, during these winter weather events to help the LDCs and also help the electric system as they're needed. Is there a way to look at some of these facilities to expand them, to add additional facilities to make sure storage is there, whether it be for the gas, electric system, or even industrial sectors who may need it, just to make sure that the facilities don't freeze, for example. So those are kind of my high-level takeaways from Elliot.
I think for me, it goes back a little bit to your point to some of the issues before we started naming winter storms, but the polar vortex, right, was one of my first experience. At the time, I was representing the consumer advocates of PJM states, and we sort of had our first sets of conversations with PJM and beginning to realize to Matthew's point, a little bit more about the logistics involved in from a generation and power sector into some of the planning that had to be done. And I think I think you do see this also in the sort of FERC conclusion, and certainly I think it was mentioned by NARUC. The weather getting wilder, my words, not my engineers who'd probably tell me, but like these patterns are changing in ways that are challenging, I think, some of the traditional 1 in 10 scenarios and things that we used to do, where you're looking at these snaps that are both more extreme from a high to low and then lasting longer. And sort of how does that affect generators and the ability of fuel, to your point, sort of like, are they getting what they need to be able to generate? One other interesting takeaway that I think has been the subject of a lot of discussion, both at probably not just PJM, but other RTOs, the trading window. How do we sync up the trading, the procurement, and the bidding windows between the sort of expectations of when we might need gas? So Elliot, of course, happened over the holidays, most notably. So we had a lot of things where people were, and my impression as the lawyer, not the trader or engineer, but we had some disconnects that we can continue to look at to try to improve, to begin to look at how generators can get the supplies they need. How does that trading work and sync up with what then PJM is turning around and expecting its generators to be able to procure in time to come online? Because you have a certain number of outages that you start to see cascading, my words again, not theirs perhaps, through the system as that cold event happens and they begin to realize that, you're having challenges. Are we making as easy to sync up as we can? And are we realistic in terms of what the market participants, the information they're getting, and then realistic in what they can share with the RTOs and the system operators and even the LDCs and EDCs?
Yeah, I think if I could weigh in here on something, go back to, I think a very important point that Matthew made early on is that even with the issues that we saw with Winter Storm Elliot, the actual conditions were not anywhere really close to what Pennsylvania NGDCs account for as far as design day parameters, right? It gets extremely cold in Pennsylvania. And we've had much colder snaps than what we experienced in Winter Storm Elliot, going back to the polar vortex or even back to some of the very sub-zero surface temperatures days that we had in the early 1990s. And we did not see these kind of problems. And, I think it'd be very instructive, and as a member of the member rep committee for NARUC, representing all small end use customers, I think it'd be very instructive to look at and review the winter reliability assessment that NARUC put out on November the 8th. As far as NARUC, in my view, sounding the alarm that 2/3 of the North American continent is under an elevated risk of resource inadequacy during extreme weather events. That to me is a startling fact. And I think NERC is trying to raise the alarm here and raise the awareness of the condition of the grid. And also just on the same token, as far as NERC is concerned, today, as of 15 minutes ago, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, NERC was releasing its long-term reliability assessment to the public. Another very important document that should be reviewed in its totality. And one of the things, and we were talking about the combined NERC-FERC report that came out and some of the recommendations, and one of the recommendations I think that makes a lot of sense to me, but may surprise some folks, is that one of the recommendations that came out is we need increased natural gas infrastructure and capacity, which may seem to some folks to be going the wrong direction, but when you consider the amount of natural gas generation, that's something that, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been talking about that FERC NERC report, and we should be. It's an important report, and it's also, if you're enough of a nerd, a good read. I mean, you can really see through that report how this whole thing, and the focus is the bulk power system, but it really is a natural gas supply story. Especially the scariest thing in there is, what if New York City lost gas pressure? If you think about implications, you know, the regulator, that a relight of New York City is just a really big thing to contemplate. But again, the narrative in the report shows how this whole system is many layers of different entities, and many times they're all solving different problems. You know, you've got producers, and so they're looking at getting trucks able to roll them out into the field so they can access the wells. You've got midstream people that are packing the pipe in advance of the storm because they know there's going to be a big need for gas. And then ironically, them packing the pipe backed up the gas at the well, helped the well freeze off. And then one of the big things is just look at the units on the graphs. You know, if we're talking about the gas system, it's graphs that are monthly or annual, maybe daily, generally not. The electric graphs are minute by minute, moment by moment. So if we're trying to thread this all the way through from a well to keeping the lights on in the bulk power system, you've got many players, and they've got different criteria for success, and it's just showed in the timeframes that they're thinking about. So, and there's a couple of questions in here that aren't really addressed in the report, and Kristen, I think you kind of alluded to this, but you know, gas day is how gas trades on the gas system. That's a daily thing, and it makes sense if you know that gas is roughly coming out of the well at the same amount every day. You do have some flexibility with storage, but power grid, you're thinking next hour, next moment, and things are changing quickly. So just having those two things work together is interesting. A couple questions, you know, like I said, that came up when I was reading it is, this event was a holiday weekend. So if you're normal, and end of the month, right? So if you're a normal routine gas trading, you set up your weekend on Friday. So then you're trying to roll noms for Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So things are copacetic. And then if you got a holiday, it might stretch that gas purchase window out a few more days. I doubt that that's what was happening here. I'm sure that everybody was working all day, every day during this event, but that's just the kind of thing where you've got a system that's set up to kind of work that way. And then you've got these events that need something different. How does everybody work together? If normal situation, you're solving different problems, and then you've got this odd thing that requires new solutions real time. I mean, you could just, like I say, reading the report, just you can almost see the people stressed out and running around while you're reading it. So
feel it in the report. You can feel the, yeah.
Well, and so as we talk about these topics, we're talking about adequacy of the resource for gas, and you talk about infrastructure. At the same time, multiple states are, and I'll speak for coming from New Jersey, assessing what is the future of natural gas. And then, and those are commonly being assessed now along the lines of a view of increased electrification in both the transportation sector, but obviously the housing sector. And so how do states that are really addressing that question and are raising the question, how do they tackle that while keeping in mind some of the observations that a few of you are pointing out about the ongoing need to ensure that the gas infrastructure is where it needs to be to provide safe energy to customers, as well as from a resource standpoint? What should states do? Easy one, right? That's an easy one.
So that's why
I start with the easy
one. And I think part of what I think too, at least for me personally, is to your point, we sometimes also forget that these cold winter, natural gas is used for heating as well. So like we think, sometimes we think about it from to your point, resource adequacy and power supply, but my memory and sort of impression from some of these reports and assessments is we have to keep in mind that for many places where I've lived versus say down south, but it is, it's being used to heat in those same cold weather conditions, and there's a high demand for it. I think states, and this is coming from Massachusetts, who just Wow, what day of the week is it? It's Wednesday. Monday released their the final order in docket 2080, which is Massachusetts look at how LDCs are supporting the state climate goals. So I think states are starting to begin to take a more formalistic, or state regulators. Obviously, I won't speak for Commissioner O'Connell, but it feels like a lot of them are beginning to take these steps to understand first the challenges, like what are your state's climate goals? How is natural gas used, but really to try to start unpacking the hood on how is the system planned, what are our expectations for it, and what are sort of our options for it. It's going to be a very long process, I think, to figure this out, because I think what probably many of us on any side of the issue would agree is we want to be thoughtful about it, because these are impacts to our customers, whether you are a dual fuel utility, or now at ComEd, who's Exelon has operating companies who have both, but like ComEd is electric, but like these are all very integrated systems at the end of the day for an end use customer, whether you are a commercial customer or a residential customer. You're thinking about my lights and my home temperature and my heat and my bills to pay those. And what we don't, I think any of us want to do is not be thoughtful about what any type of transition might look like, because these are systems people rely on, and we have to sort of gather our data and understand the unique systems. My only other sort of takeaway was it's also very locational, is my sort of experience, like because it's about your climate, your state, what your particular infrastructure looks like. I think it's going to be great to see the NARUC working group dive into this, but I also suspect a lot of it's going to come down to your particular LDC and your mix of pipes, and where are you in your main replacement program, and where are you with your, pressurization upgrades. And Matthew can probably dive into more of like from the LDC perspective, but I think it's, to me, encouraging though that we're starting to think about this more holistically, and we're really starting to invite the EDCs, to use our FERC parlance, and LDCs together to have this conversation, because it needs to be a holistic conversation.
Yeah, and the other thing, absolutely agree with that. One of the things that's again back in that report is it talks about all these events we've seen over the last however many years, and one of them was an event in 2011 in the desert Southwest region. And so that hit New Mexico, where I live. The gas utility, in order to preserve pressure for most of its customers, shut off the supply line to the northern part of the state. So like thousands of customers disconnected because of that. And so this concept of what does it take to relight, that's not something we have to wonder about. I mean, in New Mexico, it took weeks and required the National Guard going house to house. And there was also folks who found out that their beautiful Southwestern fireplace was decorative, not an actual fireplace. So we had some instances where people burned their house down to try to stay warm. So those are the kind of things that can happen if you lose end use customers on the gas system. So to your point, Joe, thinking about policy, different states have different climate policies, but it's also making me wonder about hedging the risk, right? So if you have more heating from electricity in homes, then that's not the same relight urgency or problem that you have if you're wholly dependent on natural gas for heat. So I think that's something to think about, in addition to what Daryl said is, hey, if you need to flow more gas through the pipes, we need bigger pipes. So to me, you got to think about it holistically, and in a state like New Mexico, also think about what your end target is, which is the climate policy.
Yeah, and I would just build on that. It needs to be at all above the thinking about everything. Obviously, AGA is not we want to make sure that the gas system is there and the gas system is safe. And it's interesting, and even in states that are trying to get rid of natural gas or talking about getting rid of natural gas for LDC use, they are still places that are adding customers. We've been adding we had 1,700 customers a second in 2022, and the top 5 states were Texas, Ohio, California, Florida, New York. So 2 of those states are looking to really push natural gas out. So that's an important thing. Customers want natural gas. They want it to be safe, want it reliable, want it to be affordable. And at the same time, we see this kind of juxtaposition between them and other kind of other pressures happening. So our main goal is to make sure that we are at the table in these states that are looking to evaluate the gas system, show our value, show what we can do, and then also show different pathways that we can do to decarbonize. That starts with energy efficiency issues, figuring out how to reduce costs to customers, reduce gas use, and then next going up to tightening and making sure the systems are tight, and then also adding different things, whether that be renewable natural gas or hydrogen. We have different states experimenting with different things. New Jersey already approved in rate base a hydrogen program, right? So you have the federal government investing $8 billion in hydrogen hubs. That's got to go somewhere. And I think people think about the gas system and want to get rid of it for residential use, but somehow it'll still be there somehow for industrial or power system. Well, the reality was once the LDCs go away, the odds of it being maintained for all those other uses go away as well. So it becomes harder and harder to maintain a full diverse energy system if one of these main customers do end up going away, especially when we're trying to work with those regulators to try to figure out how we can better achieve those climate goals as well and be a partner in with those efforts.
Yeah, certainly, Matt. I agree with a lot of what you were saying there, and I think good comments all around. I mean, in Pennsylvania, just from our standpoint, obviously I'm speaking for myself here. My comments don't represent the official position of the Office of Consumer Advocate, but Pennsylvania on a whole, 50% of residents heat with natural gas. About 50% of electric generation comes from natural gas. Obviously, we're sitting right in the middle of the Marcellus and Utica Shale. And so natural gas, very important resource in Pennsylvania. At the same time, we talk about our local distribution companies that are out there right now as we speak, putting millions of dollars of new pipe into the ground to replace aging infrastructure that's going to be in the ground for 30, 40, 50 years. So I think one of the things Kristen said was very important in that the phasing out of natural gas for, let's say, home heating, home use purposes, in my view, is going to take substantially longer than maybe what current public policy is envisioning. Let's put it that way. And something else that I don't think a lot of folks really give a lot of thought to is every residential customer, commercial use customer, natural gas that you electrify, convert to mini splits, electric heat pumps, whatever the situation happens to be, you're reducing the natural gas load there, but you're increasing the electric load. And that electric load is primarily fired now by natural gas. So is that a one-to-one trade-off? I'd say it probably is not a one-to-one trade-off. I would say that probably the amount of electric load you're increasing is not commensurate with the amount of natural gas load that you're decreasing. So that's just an important thing, I think, to keep in mind. And it's going to be a difficult situation to crack. I think there's some good thoughts out there, but we have billions of dollars in natural gas infrastructure in the ground, and we certainly don't want to see ratepayers paying stranded costs for those.
Well, and that's
I was going to add.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead. Sorry, Kristen. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I think one of the challenges, so in Illinois, for example, for ComEd, we have customers and communities who are in fact looking to limit and new construction. We stand, of course, ready to meet our customers and stakeholders and support what they would like to do. But one thing you said, Daryl, made me think of it too, is sort of we also have very aggressive renewable portfolio standards. There is an expectation in Illinois that we will have a fully decarbonized generation sector. That is what our policymakers and governors have told us they expect. And one reason I think, to your point, we've got to be holistic about this is from where we sit, we are then going to have to build that infrastructure to meet that demand. And we need to think about sort of what our frameworks are for meeting those communities who want to take action right now, for moving the generation to the load. I mean, for many of the things that we've done traditionally, but now might be asked to be doing here quicker. and asked to do it now in a slightly different construct than what our regulatory framework has traditionally been, which is what I would call sort of the classic one of waiting for a customer to come to us and say, okay, we want to do something here. And we go, great. Now we're being told or encouraged to anticipate those in a way that is not really what we've been asked to do so before. And I think when you put that together with what you say about trying to map and understand what the LDC network in a given area, like the city of Chicago looks like, and sort of like some of the challenges they've had with their replacement, like it becomes something that, makes me glad that our commission has signaled they want to do a sort of holistic look at this, because there's a lot of challenges for us, I think, about in terms of meeting those customer expectations, getting those renewables online, building out something that can continue to provide the resiliency, record-setting reliability that our customers are used to, while we may be, to your point, adding significant load, and for us shifting to a winter peaking system potentially, right? Which is also much different than, and my engineers may tell me it's not that much different, but to me it's strikingly different, both in the scale of the expected peak, the timing of the peak, a lot of those questions that we have to understand and work through.
Yeah, and the infrastructure point is a really important one, and it's what I wanted to key in on next. And what Daryl, you talked about earlier is important, that we have states, New Jersey being one where we are, and others, obviously Illinois is another one where you're seeing companies really focusing on, and the commission's seeing the benefit of the companies focusing on modernizing aging gas infrastructure. And it wasn't that long ago that the environmental benefits associated with that, of methane reduction associated with modernizing the pipeline, was recognized. There's been a shift in some states recently now where that has not been as much of the focus, but in a world where we're seeing increasing gas customers, increased recognition of the need to ensure that, with these extreme temperatures at different times, we need to make sure people have heat. What should the focus, what should commissions focus on, and what should utilities be focusing most closely on in terms of infrastructure, when you've got all these potentially competing viewpoints around a really important topic?
Well, for me, that's a great question, because again, you go back and look at the natural gas supply system, having the commodity there when you need it at the price you want it isn't something that's regulated by state regulators. And in some cases, it's also not regulated by federal regulators. So that was something that I think would be a good request for the GEAR to do, is just kind of map the regulatory gaps out there. So from wellhead to midstream, that's probably going to be an interstate system, so not federally regulated. Put the gas on the interstate pipe, that's a federally regulated thing. Get the gas to the city gate, and then electric utility is an end use customer of the LDC or the shipper at that point. And so then it flips around back to maybe me regulating both sides of it, the gas regulation and the electric side of it. So it'd be worth it, I think, just to map that out, see, because there is a call for legislation, but until you know where the gaps are, it's kind of hard to say legislation from whom. And then we're talking about infrastructure, and to me, infrastructure isn't just the pipes in the ground. It's the trading of these commodities, the systems that result in you buying something that you can use, because we talked about it before, just how the gas day doesn't match the electric system, and that the gas industry for decades has been saying, hey, we're the bridge. We know that renewable energy is coming. We can be the thing that helps fill in the gaps when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. But what I haven't seen yet is movement towards being the bridge that's needed. It's like, here's the bridge that's here, deal with it, and then you end up with something like Winter Storm Elliot. So what I'd like to see from a regulator point of view is more progress on this harmonization concept on the gas system, understanding that end use customer, which is the electric system, and figuring out how to work together better.
So I will say that that is actually a very regional concern and issue, in the sense that when you have a situation like the LDCs in California work very closely with the California ISO, and they are very much in simpatico when things have to happen. There's a lot of communication on that front. And the same thing happens in New England because of their situation being at the end of the supply line. Where we're seeing a lot of different problems are those areas where they don't have much experience, or things that move very quickly to natural gas generation. And then they don't have the level of experience I think that's happening. And I think we're going to start seeing that more and more quickly over time. I also think that there are issues that do need to be addressed on the supply side at the wellhead, to make sure that the requirements are in place, that we don't have a freeze off issue like we've had. I mean, the report from in the Southwest in your area was years and years ago, but no one took very much heed to it. And the same thing happened during Uri, right? So and the same thing then again happened with Elliot in places like Ohio, where you assume people are weatherized or winterized. And that's a real problem. I think we're going to start seeing some movement both at the state level, at the wellhead issues, and then maybe at NASB, the North American Energy Standards Board, pushing some of these issues to get those things addressed, and getting the business practices updated so that we can have those issues. And then also NASB is going to be addressing communication issues as well, based on the Elliot report, determining how the gas and electric system better communicate kind of on a going forward basis. That is something I know they're going to start working on in the short term.
I think one thing you mentioned too, we sometimes, when I think about this holistic transition to whatever the new future will look like, is that you mentioned we sometimes forget about, is the importance of energy efficiency, but also weatherization. To your point, a lot of what these projections and models, and I think it's been a very real conversation, I know not just in Illinois but around the country, the equity considerations as we look at this transition going forward. To me, a lot of it comes back to, we have a sort of a collective public policy challenge on weatherization, how we can help people make the most out of these programs and incentives that we have right now, but really get themselves to manage their energy use, but then also to manage the impacts that we're all going to struggle, that we're going to deal with, to struggle to meet. Weatherization and energy efficiency really remains a critical part of this conversation, and a really important source of what are the regulatory frameworks to encourage everyone to do them, and then what is the best way to handle it for cities. And Chicago's not alone. Boston, New York, we're like this. We have a substantial number of renters, people who are, struggle with housing issues sort of before you start talking about whether they can weatherize or what they can do, and how, I just always feel like I want to always sounding like we also have to make sure we don't forget about that in this conversation. Like, can we do everything we can to help everyone? Because that will benefit all of us, gas, electric system operators, because it will manage some of that demand and put us in the best seat to try to have those impacts, understood and forecasted. So I'm so glad you mentioned it, Matt, because it's both of those are big things that maybe feel a little old school at this point, feel a little bit like, yeah, we've done that, but we shouldn't forget about them.
I think it's hysterical because sometimes people need to go back to basics, because everything is cyclical, and something that was weatherized or winterized 20 years ago, hey, you got to put new insulation in. Like, it's not, I'm a homeowner, I got to do it all the time. You got to do upkeep on basic things. And I think a lot of policymakers forget that maybe it's not that we already tried that and it's done. It's, oh, we need to try that and keep it going, kind of thing.
And as those
100%.
policymakers, I'm sorry, as was, did you have something, Daryl, or somebody popped up?
Yes, I did. I was just going to go back and comment to what Pat started saying about the, natural gas being our bridge to whatever's next, right? Renewables, most popularly discussed, but I think the bridge is going to be very long. It's probably going to be a lot bigger bridge than most people realize. Unfortunately, we're not going to get there quickly. Moving in the right direction, but weatherization, as Kristen mentioned a moment ago, extremely important, and understanding that in some recent news articles and studies that are out there, even people, residences who are currently heating with, say, heating oil or natural gas, and moving to a high efficiency heat pump, depending upon the climate where they're located, are actually being instructed to maintain that main heating source because the housing stock is insufficient to be heated by even a high efficient heat pump. These high efficient heat pumps are great, and mini split systems are great, but they are predominantly designed to operate in newer builds with very heavy levels of insulation. And that's great, but if you're not in that situation, it just shows that, the move to electrification is probably not going to be as quickly as we think it might be. And the bridge from natural gas to renewables, and it's just Pennsylvania specific fact here, and we just got notice of this yesterday that our Department of Environmental Protection put out a press release that stated that Pennsylvania has now officially crossed the 1 gigawatt level of installed solar capacity in the state of Pennsylvania. And obviously we're not California or Florida or Arizona, but we do have a high propensity for solar. So, but we've just crossed the 1 gigawatt mark, and 2/3 of that capacity is on the distribution system in the form of rooftop solar. And the other 1/3 is commercial. So that's a total of 1 gigawatt. And yet, if you just think about it in comparison's sake, from my house, I can look across cornfields, and about 3/4 of a mile away, I can see one natural gas generating facility that's 750 megawatt nameplate capacity for one unit. So, in comparison, we are making strides in Pennsylvania on solar, and I'm sure we're going to continue to ramp that up. But we're substantial away from replacing a large amount of natural gas production and generation.
And utility customers, at the risk of stating the most obvious thing, utility customers are going to pay for that, and whether or not they are. And so how do we now, for utility customers, how do we manage what can feel like, even within certain states where you feel like there's a policy direction can shift, a shifting policy and shifting policy direction. How do utility customers, because those changes in policies are all going to have a price tag. And so how do utility customers, what's in the best interest of utility customers from an affordability standpoint with all the different policies? Obviously, the utilities have an obligation to provide safe, adequate, and reliable service to their customers. It's got to be affordable. So with all the different types of incentives and that drive a lot of the clean energy, but then the need for natural gas, how is this, what's a utility customer to do? And from a cost standpoint, to try to ensure that utilities are keeping their commitments to provide this reliable service, whether it's electric or gas, affordably.
Well, Joe, from a consumer advocate standpoint, now I'll start because you directly talked about the impact to ratepayers. Okay, so, and as a consumer advocate, I think someone said this not long ago. So we have two concerns, right? As consumer advocates, we want the lights to stay on, and we want people to be able to afford to actually flip the light switch. So, two big concerns, right? How do we manage that? Well, for one, weatherization is extremely important. Conservation is important. Education on those two fronts is important. We need to, in my view, reduce the energy usage per unit and where we are now. And we need to make people more aware of their actual energy use. So we have smart meters deployed across all of Pennsylvania now, and that's been a great asset. But I don't know that we provided sufficient education to the populace to understand, look, from 5 o'clock at night until 8 o'clock at night is a peak period. And we have certainly experimented with a number of time of use programs, and they're very difficult to implement. And I don't think Pennsylvania's alone there. They're difficult to implement anywhere. But
And from a customer, difficult to implement because customers still aren't aware of the capabilities of, say, a smart meter and how the time of use and the cost can vary. You mean from that standpoint, or just overall more broadly?
I think people are interested in time of use rates, and they can be interested in them, but unfortunately, time of use rate designs often create a very large period of time where you're not in the best rate design area, let's say. And that can work for some people, which is great. But I think for the majority of especially residential customers that come home from work at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night and want to plug in their electric car and turn the oven on, turn the TV on, get the news of the day and make dinner. I mean, now we're in peak period. And, having those people shift that usage to off peak doesn't really work too well. But do we need to do more education on how much energy are you really using in that period? Do consumers really understand that maybe you don't need to run your dishwasher right now? Let's, set that for 10 o'clock tonight. Do you really need to plug the car in at 5 o'clock? There's a lot of educational components out there that I think can be increased, maximized to help conservation efforts.
I was going to say, I think, to your point, we have the smart meters here, AMI in Illinois, since the final rollout, I think, for ComEd was fully completed. And I may get this wrong. I would say 2018, 2017, 2018 had a schedule. And we had, with the help of stakeholders, come together on an anonymous data sharing protocol so that we've been able to, Citizens Utility Board and others have drawn data down to see, to your point, Joe, exactly how do people, respond and what's there. And again, I'll give the disclaimer you did. This is my opinion, not that of the ComEd or Excellent companies, but the real-time pricing really shows benefits at sort of across the board, even before you assume behavior change, when you even look at factoring in income and usage. I think there are a lot of things to the return to basics point that someone made. We can dust off and go back to some of these more fundamental questions about rate design and about what's the right education, and are we giving people the tools to manage? I think also we're broadening that out now to look at how will electrification technologies writ large really be used. And that's why I mentioned that winter peaking. To your point, like if people are getting up in the morning and our system's peaking, like 4 a.m., they're going to want to turn the heat on, understandably, to heat the house, to get ready for school, to go to work, to do these things. Like, what's the right rate design for that? What's the right traditional class for those groups of people who have that's equitable? And do we need to revisit some of these just basic frameworks, because we're in a very, if our, at least in Illinois, our policymakers, our stakeholders, want to see a different world, is it time to revisit some of these different core rate design questions that, at least when I first started, were sort of looked at very traditionally? We don't want to cross-subsidize or worried about, like all important principles, but are they being adapted in the right way for the new world? And I think, to your point, this is the first I've started to hear about natural gas demand response, very localized demand response, and kind of like, which was not, maybe it was my personal experience, not something I'd really heard about. It was always about electric and electric peak and electric usage. And again, to your point on the customer, it's like, that's why to me that coordination and that sort of holistic thing, if you're a regulator, is going to be really important, because you need to see the whole framework of the people in your service territory and like what are the combined incentives that your EDC and your LDC are sending to people, and what's reasonable, to your point, for them to react, for us to expect them to react or expect them to pay.
Yeah, and it's easy to see, and it's a fun conversation to have, all the opportunities that exist on the electric side with pricing to help shape behavior, demand, optimize supply, but I'm not seeing how a clear way to do that for the gas bill, right? So if you have your gas, you've got two big components, right? Paying back the capital for the system that's built and then paying for the commodity. Well, most of the commodity is bought at a first of the month index price. So how do you, and then your gas commodity thing is kind of like we're working off this pack and draft on cost, right? It's not just the supply. It's like well, last month we didn't use as much as we thought, or it was a little cheaper on daily than it was the first of the month. So I'm trying to give you some money back, or you get in a situation like December of 2023 where you add Elliot on top of an already high price commodity. I bet customers are still paying for the gas that was purchased during Elliot now, a year later. So if that's the situation, then how do you get price signals to customers on the gas side?
Yeah, and I'll just say, yeah, getting that, you don't get the instant response on the gas side by way of what everyone talked about. It's a minute by minute thing. Electric side, the gas side is a little different. But I will say that the LDCs that we've spoken to did have great success communicating with the customers during Elliot to reduce demand. So using the demand response programs at the residential level, as well as the industrial and business class people, to kind of reduce demand to help keep the system going. Now, that's not a regular financial incentive like we're talking about regular time of use rates, but I do think there's a lot to do there in different areas of the country where we can get more formalized programs in place, maybe credits, things like that, to help people, help customers, help the gas and electric systems manage kind of these issues and get some financial credits back when they do those kind of things.
Yep. Okay. So we got about 8 minutes, 8 or 9 minutes left here. This has been a great conversation. I could talk about this all day long. There's so many other roads we can go down, but in the hour that we have, I want to make sure we get to a couple of questions that have been raised in the Q&A here. The first one is, shouldn't the topic, instead of being electric gas harmonization, be what does the electric sector need to do or change to ensure that the lights stay on? Or how can policymakers be educated on how reliability is affected by their action? So again, to go back to earlier, this is the obligation of the utilities and the commissions to ensure that the lights stay on and the gas flows. So, any comments from anyone about how we make sure that through all this, we're not forgetting that most important point?
I think maybe it's just because we are just coming out of our first multi-year rate plan, multi-year grid plan proceeding. So I will say it's top of mind, I think, for our regulators, but certainly for ComEd. I think the same is true from at least a couple of the other excellent opcos who also had rate plans. It's a great question because we're very mindful, to your point, and I'm very aware of as I'm sure the gas companies are too. So let me just very aware of reliability and very aware of, as these demands begin to get placed on our system, what are the tools in our toolbox to sort of really understand how we can maintain that reliability? And I think, to your point, resiliency as well. If we're looking ahead at climate change and we're seeing these events that are different, more frequent, more unexpected than we might have before, what can we do? Some of it, I think, is the awareness of not just AMI, but the next generation of digital equipment that we can use on our grid to really have the visibility into what we expect if our policymakers are successful, thousands of distributed energy resources and electric vehicles. A lot of it on the electric side, I think, as well, for us, we start thinking about how we can move power around, how we can move load around, how we can move systems around to maintain reliability. How quickly can these new tools help us, continually refine the groups of customers that might be affected by an outage, make that smaller, be able to rewrite power quicker. How can we use those resources when we need it to perhaps, enhance and add to the reliability and resiliency? But a lot of it, I think, is really being mindful of other things that are basics that climate change is also having us. And that's like vegetation. Still our number one, Winter Storm Elliot and others notwithstanding, it's vegetation. And so we actually did a study on how climate change is going to affect the vegetation in our area, and, have asked our regulators to approve some additional programs to say, we still got to get ahead of this. Like, again, our theme might be that, like, some of these some of these very basic things that we all do as utilities really need to continue to be part of that conversation and brought top of mind, because as resilient as we would want the system to be, we still got to control for squirrels and trees. And that's just going to be the reality of doing some of that work.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Appreciate that, Kristen. And then so two other questions here I want to make sure I want to get to before we break. We've only about 6 minutes left. The one was raised was a question about electrification across all demographics, and what about those that are not interested? So I guess I think the question is, well, I don't want to get a heat pump or I'm not interested in electrification. So how do we, and I think we touched upon that earlier. This came in a little earlier. I think we touched upon that you can't really have a perfect one size fits all policy, but any other comments on, that topic? Daryl, I saw you wanted to speak up for a second ago, so sorry about that. I jumped over that.
Yeah, that's quite all right, Joe. I was just going to quickly weigh in about what Kristen was saying about squirrels and trees. We appreciate that in Pennsylvania because obviously Penns Woods, Pennsylvania, yes, we've thousands and thousands of acres of forests, and they don't interact well with electric distribution facilities. But there is if you look at programs being done by Green Mountain Power in Vermont, Connecticut right now, I think it is that they're really aggressively going to undergrounding distribution circuits and also whole house battery storage for residential customers to increase reliability. As far as consumers who, let's say you're heating with some fossil fuel source now, and you don't want to go to, I don't want a heat pump, I don't want to electrify. There's plenty of people in Pennsylvania that still heat with heating oil. Not a carbon neutral fuel source, but maybe in areas where you can't get natural gas. A lot of people still heating with propane, which may seem unusual to a lot of folks around the country, maybe, but there's a large amount of heating load that's being done by propane. So there are options. I don't think anybody is forcing electrification down anyone's throat at this point in time, and hopefully let's not get there. But there's options for those folks that don't want to go that way.
Yeah, I think it's a bigger question of how do you keep those options open for the people that do want to go there. I mean, I understand some folks never will, but there's going to be reasons people do move there. And so that's more interesting from a regulator point of view is you've got one system where you're expecting demand to grow because there's attractive choices on that side versus that it might be at the expense of another system. So, going back to the big regulator question is making sure it's all priced at a level people can afford. It's just an interesting time to be a regulator because if the trend is your friend, there's two different trends out there.
Yeah, exactly. That's helpful. Customers have different desires and expectations and needs, and you try to make everyone as happy as possible while making sure the lights stay on and the gas keeps flowing. Right? The last one, I think this is maybe, and I don't know if this came out in the NARUC report, but the reference earlier, I think maybe this is referred to, I may be mistaken, this might be referred to something that Daryl had teed up earlier in the conversation. The question is, how much more electric generation would have been needed to meet those peak energy needs during Winter Storm Elliot? Mike, you wanted to take that one? Sounds like
No, I was just getting ready to clear the board for it once you
Oh,
asked
it
the
says
question.
you'd like to answer it. I thought you were going to jump over Daryl. Okay, I'm going to throw it back to Daryl. I think that was the point that you raised earlier about the peak, about just So, or if Daryl or anybody else who wants to weigh in on that, who might have the answer. Or if we don't, I don't know if we
I
know.
was going to let Daryl.
I don't know if we have anything
think,
on a quantitative answer.
Yeah, I was going to ask him, and I think that this is maybe the lawyer in me. So is the idea like how well, like, is it the peak? Like, let's assume ComEd's system does shift to it. Like, what's our winter peak? How much additional will we need in resources to meet that? I would probably try and give you a quantitative answer, and then I'm sure my policy directors will tell me that I'm missing some. Let's say I agree that the implication is it's substantial because, of course, the winter demands and particularly are going to be substantial. This was true, I think, when we looked at it at National Grid. It's true for ComEd and probably true for a lot of folks around the country. How we can meet those is going to be with a variety of resources. But I think to your point, or what someone said earlier, it's about starting to get ahead of that and being prepared for that demand. And, step one could be managing that demand, bringing it down through demand response, efficiency, weatherization. Step two is probably dependent on your state, but like looking at those distributed, and I guess let me not use the word distribute, but say longer term solar and or storage. Like, where are these additional things that we can bring to supplement the supply to meet that? But, part of me says that, like, planning, utilities have fantastic engineers who are problem solvers. And we can plan, and we will plan and be ready for it. But one reason I think this conversation, others are really helpful, is we can only begin to do that when we start to understand the pace of change. And I love the trend is your friend, like the expectations for change in our jurisdictions and what these questions are. But I know that PJM, for example, is looking at this constantly, like what's the expectations of resource adequacy on their system. And I'm sure other RTOs, NERC and FERC are as well, to get ahead of it.
Yeah,
And the
and I'll
lawyers
just
can
say,
help too, right? The lawyers can
Yeah.
always help too. Yes.
no,
Yes.
I was just gonna say, well, I don't have specific numbers, but the general rule of thumb we've always been told is that the natural gas system delivers 3 times more energy than the electric system. Natural gas system delivers 3 times more energy in the winter than the electric system does in the summer during their peak. And that's a national figure, and there are certain pockets where it's 4 to 5 times as much. So think about the implications of that for electric generation plus electric transmission, which we haven't talked about, and how to build all those wonderful things to get to where energy is needed. So
yeah. Well, that's really been helpful. Listen, this is a topic we can talk about all day long, but we are at the top of the hour, 1 minute past. So so much more to talk about. My goodness. But what I really want to thank the panel here. This was a fantastic discussion, and it's one that, as I mentioned, our company has been focused on, but I learned a lot in the past hour and 1 minute here. So thank you for that. And thanks to FRI for organizing this today. Very helpful.
And I want to add my thanks to the panelists and also to you, Joe, for leading the conversation. As you said, this has been a really interesting hour and a couple of minutes. I was especially interested in some of the comments about the importance of rate design and affecting some of these things. FRI has an advanced seminar for transformational rate design and pricing, and this year we're going to be combining electricity and natural gas into the same track. So we're going to be talking about these issues. That program will be April 30th to May 2nd, I believe, and we'll have registration information about that available after the first of the year. So for those of you who joined us today, thank you, and give our round of applause to those online virtually here. We appreciate your time today. We'll have this webinar up on our YouTube channel, FRI-Mizzou, M-I-Z-Z-O-U, in the next day or two, so you can go back and watch this again and share it with friends. And go to the FRI website, fri.missouri.edu, to learn about upcoming Hot Topic Hotline webinars, our advanced seminar, our Regulated Utility Leadership Institute, which is in June, and our annual symposium, which will be September 18th next year in St. Louis, where we'll be focusing in some respects on some of these same issues, and that's how we deal with extreme events and how we manage and prepare for and ensure against extreme events, both operationally and financially. So keep an eye out for those programs. Thank you all for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks all.
Thank you.